Obviously, like the UK is in like a strange sort of position at the moment. Like we've attempted to sort of leave the the garden of the European Union and the sort of ring fenced trading bloc that it is. Although that seems to be decreasing as they make trade deals with other parts of the world. South America, their farmers aren't so happy about that. And so we're not quite tied to the European Union anymore. We got told that the whole vote was about sovereignty, and I sort of got that argument. But do you think that that's like something that could realistically play out? Like, are we taking back control of our sovereignty in the post-Brexit world?
No, broadly, we're not. Broadly, we have failed to reclaim sovereignty, I think largely because people don't really understand what sovereignty means. So what some people seem to think sovereignty means is total control over everything so that you can just choose whatever you want. And this sort of naive approach to sovereignty doesn't just manifest among, hard right Brexiteers or whatever. It manifests among Remainers too. So they're the kinds of people that say Ukraine has got a sovereign right to join NATO, for example. So you must, respect that sovereign right. Well, did the UK have a sovereign right to say, well, we want total access to the EU market, but without following any of the rules? Everybody thought that was ridiculous because, you've actually got another party that you've got to negotiate with, and if they don't want to give you what you want, then there is no right to it. So sovereignty doesn't mean total control. It doesn't mean that you can just impose your wishes on everybody else or get everything that you want. That's not what sovereignty is about. Sovereignty is having a government that is accountable to and responsive to the popular will, the people that it represents, and there is no higher authority above that government that can contradict the will of the people and make them follow other decisions and other rules. Now, it doesn't mean that you've got, to repeat my point, it doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want. Right? Responsible sovereignty means, okay, we want this, but how do we get that in the world which is obviously composed of other sovereign states and other peoples with other attitudes and other interests? We have to navigate all of that internationally. But what we haven't got with Brexit is, first of all, we haven't broken decisively from EU rules because of the problem of Northern Ireland in particular. Northern Ireland is still totally subject to single market rules. And so the difficulty is in what do you do if you want to keep Northern Ireland inside the UK, but you don't want an internal border that splits off the EU governed bit from the rest of the UK. And the solution effectively that the British government has adopted, there's been different variations of this solution, but the solution effectively is not to deviate from EU rules, so that there is no real departure from EU style governance. Yes, there are some bits and bobs here and there where you think, oh, well, actually, you couldn't really have done that if you were inside the EU, but actually, particularly because of the Northern Ireland issue, if you were to diverge from EU rules, you would see a hard border established between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and that's what ruling elites don't want. So actually, Northern Ireland is a fetter on British sovereignty. It keeps us tied to the European Union. And so we argue in the book that the only way to restore the sovereignty of the British people is to recognise that the British state is not sovereign in Northern Ireland. And in fact, we should support the reunification of Ireland under a single Irish republic, and then we would be much freer to determine our own rules for ourselves. But the bigger problem is that we're never going to have a government at the moment that will be bold enough to take that step, because we don't have political parties that represent ordinary people and are willing to take bold and decisive steps to break from the established way of doing things, which includes, going along with EU regulations. So we haven't really made very much use of the freedom to change the way that we do things in this country, to enact a real industrial policy, for example, that could revitalize the British economy, to impose capital controls, which you would need to do to prevent bond markets punishing you for trying to do anything a bit different. We haven't done any of those things. We're still stuck in what we call in the book. We say we're a post-member state. So we haven't become a nation state again, one where the government is responsive to the will of ordinary people. We've still got this hangover of a kind of EU-style governance. And at the heart of that is the political problem of the crisis of representation, where political parties are not responsive to the broad masses of the people. So there was a poll just before the last UK general election. 60% of people don't feel represented by any of the political parties. There was a huge gulf, a void between ordinary people and the people that claim to represent them. That's in fact why we got to Brexit in the first place, we argue in the book, right? It's that void that people were sick of it and they voted for a change, but the void remains. We have left the European Union, which kind of institutionalized this void by having rules that were made between elites, between national elites, without really any consultation of or involvement of the people, without much regard for what ordinary people thought and wanted. That institutionalized that crisis, that delinking of the people and the elites. So we've left there. That's not locking us in anymore. But the political problem of the disjuncture between the people and the elites, that remains. The void remains to be filled. So the underlying political problem remains. And we set out, that's the thesis of the book. The void explains how we got to Brexit. It explains why Brexit was such a shambles. It explains why things haven't gotten any better. And it sets out what we need to do to try to rebuild representative democracy in the UK. We need to democratize the state. And then you might have a government that actually has some will to make some changes and take us in a new direction. But at the moment, we don't.
Would that involve reforming the voting system in your mind?
Yes. So, for many years I was opposed to proportional representation, but now I think it's the only way to destroy the established parties, which I think is necessary. The established parties have shown that they're completely incapable of self-renewal. They are zombified. They're hollow shells that are largely disconnected from the people that they claim to represent. They're not offering anything new at all. They're offering either reheated Thatcherite policies in the sense of the Tories, or a kind of a drab, grey, funereal version of New Labour in the form of the Labour Party. And neither of them are capable of offering any hope or future to the country. So they've had their chance to reinvent themselves, to offer something new, to reconnect with the electorate. That was what the Brexit crisis was really about. And they've completely failed. And so the first past the post system is unfortunately propping up these zombie parties that don't really deserve to be propped up anymore. So you have in the case of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, they got a third of the vote and 2/3 of seats in Parliament.
Yeah.
It's one of the most malapportioned parliaments on the planet.
Yeah. 3 million
and that
less
can't be
votes
right.
3 million less votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017, which is insane.
Yes, when he lost.
Yeah, when he lost.
Right? And if we, let me just look at the stats, because you're right that they got 34% of the votes, 33.7% of the votes this time round, which, as you say, is lower than when Corbyn lost the election in 2017, because he got 40%.
Yeah.
And 33.7% is not much more than Corbyn got in 2019, he got 32.1% of the vote. And that was the worst defeat for the Labour Party since the 1930s. So for all this talk about how Keir Starmer has, rescued the Labour Party and changed it and won back the confidence of the people, absolutely not. People voted to get rid of the Tories. Only 5% of people who voted Labour did so because of their policies, because they didn't really offer any policies. So we come to the conclusion in the book that proportional representation is the only way to smash the established oligarchy of these dilapidated, zombified political parties, which are relics of the 20th century, right? They used to represent organized blocks of opinion, classes in particular, the working class in the case of the Labour Party, the property classes in the case of the Conservatives. They no longer do those things. That was their purpose. They don't do it anymore, and they're completely incapable of running the country effectively. It's very obvious. So proportional representation, I think, is the only way to either make these political parties more responsive to what ordinary people want and more accountable, and therefore save themselves, or to be swept away by innovators. But we do say in the book that it's not just PR that we need, it's PR plus, if you like. It's a range of other reforms that would be needed to incentivize the creation of new parties that were genuinely responsive to ordinary people. So, for example, one of the things would be reform to the way that political parties are funded. So to effectively ban corporate donations, which would include donations by the trade unions, not just companies, and limit individual donations to about £1,000 a year. So if you want to survive as a political party, you need money. How are you going to get money? Go and attract lots of small donations from ordinary people and build up a mass of popular support. So it's when you put all the different reforms together that we suggest in the book, that would lead to a slow, protracted, but and difficult, but progress and movement towards a more democratic society that we just don't have at the moment. But proportional representation, I think, just has to be part of the mix now.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.